Today we are diving into a real literary heavyweight, Charles Dickens's novel Hard Times. But here's the twist. Instead of just singing its praises, we're going to put it under the microscope through the eyes of the critic, J.B.Priestly. And let me tell you, Priestley's argument is sharp, it's controversial, and it really makes you think about what makes a novel, well, what makes it truly great. So, let's get into it.
First off, you gotta understand just how much praise this book has gotten over the years. It's often held up as this incredible work of social critique. I mean, one Cambridge pundit famously said it was the only Dickens novel worth reading. The only one! Now that is a massive claim, and it really sets the stage for a pretty big literary showdown.
But J.B.Priestly, he had a completely different take. When he heard that bit of praise, his response was just immediate and, frankly, brutal. He called it surely one of the most foolish statements of this age. And right there, that single quote just throws down the gauntlet and perfectly frames the whole argument we're about to explore.
So let's dig into Priestley's first major point. See, he didn't just disagree with that Cambridge critic. He totally flipped the script. Priestley argued that out of all Dickens's mature novels, Hard Times was actually the least worth reading. Yeah, a pretty controversial opinion to say the least.
And this right here gets to the absolute heart of his logic. Priestley is basically saying, look, you can 100% agree with the book's message. You can agree with its condemnation of industrial society, but that doesn't automatically make it a masterpiece of a novel. For him, just because you support the cause doesn't mean you have to praise what he saw as flawed art.
Okay, so if the message isn't the problem, then what is? Well, this is where Priestley starts to dismantle the book on purely artistic grounds. He's not attacking the ideas anymore. He's attacking its very construction as a piece of fiction. And here's the central irony that Priestley points out. He says that Hard Times is the one book where Dickens actually becomes the writer his harshest critics always accused him of being. You know, all those negative stereotypes about his writing? Priestley says you can find them all right here in this one novel.
So, what were these flaws exactly? Well, Priestley's list is pretty specific. He points to reckless and theatrical overstatements, characters that are just flat caricatures instead of real, breathing people, and a story that's driven by what he called muddled, melodramatic emotionalism. But maybe most importantly, he says it lacks the grotesque poetic genius, that weird, brilliant, creative spark that makes a book like Bleak House so unforgettable. So, if the novel has all these flaws, the next question is, why? Priestley argues that the answer isn't a lack of talent, it's a lack of first-hand knowledge.
I mean, how could one of the greatest novelists in history get this particular subject so wrong? Priestley believes it wasn't a failure of his incredible talent, but, a failure of his homework, a failure of knowledge.
His diagnosis was actually pretty simple. Dickens was an outsider looking in. He just didn't know enough about the gritty industrial world he was trying to write about because he wasn't writing from a place of deep personal experience. And when you look at it, his experience was really limited. He caught some horrifying glimpses during a reading tour, sure. He paid one quick visit to a town during a strike, but he left thinking there was no drama there. So ultimately, Priestley argues, Dickens saw his fictional Coke town the way a tourist would, just a quick view through the window of a passing train. And this is so crucial, what he missed. The Coke town in the book is a caricature. It's just a horrible place to find by these cartoon villains like Gradgrind and Bounderby, and the only good thing is a simple traveling circus. But what Priestley says was actually there was a complex, living town full of real arts and skills, warm relationships, and all kinds of fascinating people. In other words, Dickens completely missed the humanity of it all. All of this leads us to Priestley's final and probably his most damning judgment on the novel. It wasn't just a failure by accident. He thinks it was a failure by design because its main goal was something other than art. And his final verdict really hangs on this key distinction. For Priestley, propaganda is what happens when art is just there to serve a pre-cooked message. But true creative imagination, well, that's something else. That flows from a deep, genuine understanding of the world you're writing about. So because Dickens didn't really know his subject, he couldn't create from that place of imagination. He could only build a town that was designed to prove a point. And that leads us right to Priestley's final, devastating judgment. As it is, Coketown belongs to propaganda and not to creative imagination. So to wrap it all up, Priestley's case against Hard Times is that it's a book where the message completely steamrolls the art. In his rush to make this powerful social statement, Dickens ended up sacrificing the very things that made his other novels masterpieces: the complexity, the authentic characters, and that one-of-a-kind creative genius.
And that leaves us with a really fascinating question to think about, not just for Dickens, but for all art. Does a powerful, important message make up for artistic flaws? Or, as Priestley would argue, does true art demand something more? It's a debate that is just as relevant now as it was back in Dickens's day.